Okay, so much welcome, and I hope you can hear me in the headphones and the people that are with us online. So good afternoon. My name is Peter Jakobsen, and I represent SMC, Faith in Development, a Swedish network organization for Christian faith-based organizations. And most welcome to this afternoon seminar with the very intriguing title, Reimagining Climate Financing. And this seminar is a cooperation between SMC and some of our members like LM International, ERICS, UNEP Faith for Earth, and also the Japanese organization Sakagakai. And it's great to have representatives here. And I'm going to hand over to our very best moderator, Tapiwa Himeke, and it's great to have you here. And you'll introduce the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our seminar. And I think I'm just going to go straight into the seminar and into these discussions. So it's going to be more of conversations between the panel and also the guests and the participants to ensure that we have a little bit more of a discussion rather. So our first speaker is a person of multiple chairs, from his interfaith engagement for climate environment as the leader of UNEP's Faith for Earth initiative, but also coming from the Islamic faith, which has immensely prominent role in faith-based financing, with the global Islamic finance industry expecting to reach over $5.9 trillion by 2026. Islamic financial instruments also offer a quite unique but potential combining. You can't hear me? Oh, yeah. So Islamic financial instruments also offer a quite unique potential for combining ethical principles with green investments. So Dr. Iyed, can you tell us about climate financing, but also introducing the Islamic finance, what it is?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. First, to start with a commitment.
No, it's fine. It's on now.
Right. So, first of all, I am not a finance expert. I had my colleagues just before us in a seminar explaining what climate finance is and trying to talk about what is the debate that is currently taking place and what are the different types of climate finance that are there. But basically, to put it in a layman's perspective, well, at least from my perspective, to make it easy to understand, climate finance is a combination of resources that are needed to implement the basic principle of Paris Agreement to keep the temperature of Earth below 1.5 degrees. And basically it is meant to finance adaptation and mitigation measures that would lead to achieving that goal. The different sources of climate finance is a mixture of sources. The public sources from governments, from multilateral banks and institutions and funds and so on, but also private financing from financial institutions, from donations and so on. The climate finance is intended to go to the to the countries that are most impacted by climate change, whether to help those countries take mitigation measures or myself. But can you still hear me? All right. Or to help countries adapt to the impact of climate change. So in terms of mitigation, it is reducing the dependence on fossil fuel. It is the development of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and so on. And adaptation, it's integrated agricultural and sustainable agricultural systems. It is risk reduction, disaster support, and so on. Now, there are currently many challenges facing such a financing mechanism. First of all, the intentions, the ambition of governments in putting resources into the funds that have been created for this purpose, the challenges of competing demands. We know that the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, would require lots of financial resources for the implementation of, for example, the educational goal or fighting poverty. And then we have the challenge of climate change and other environmental issues. So the competing demands is very important challenge that we are facing. A third one is whether it is going to the appropriate or proper recipients or not, and how it is being utilized for the purposes it is meant for. And a fourth challenge is the accessibility, even if a government is identified or a country is identified, whether this government or country has the capacity to develop the required mechanisms to receive such financial resources. So this is in a nutshell what climate finance is. Of course, it's more and complicated than those few words. But one mechanism that is seen as a potential, which is the Islamic finance modalities. And Islamic finance is based on some basic principles that makes it very suitable to be considered for climate finance as well as for sustainable development in general. So the basic principles, first of all, in 1400 years ago when climate finance was established, it was meant to be a mechanism to finance, to be a finance mechanism to achieve justice among communities. And the second principle is what is called al-adl, which is the basic principle behind giving those deprived. And the third principle is the social cohesion and contributing to financing social development among communities. And the fourth one is the no harm principle. Any financing, any mechanisms for trading should not harm people or nature. So these are the basic principles behind the Islamic finance. Now, to understand the Islamic finance, we need to understand the principle of no interest, which is no riba in Arabic. This is a very important principle. You cannot have an Islamic finance which gives you a fixed term or a fixed interest rate on your investment or your financial transactions. And basically, this is to encourage just full investment and mobilization of financial resources among the communities. So, and under that principle comes different modalities of financing. One of them is called al-murabaha, which is the sharing of profits. It requires two parties to invest in an investment opportunity, and then the profits is shared equally between those investors, as well as the risks. So if there is a loss in the investment, both parties contribute or bear the consequences of the loss in profits. The other one is al-musharaka or al-mudaraba, which means that one contributes in assets or ideas or development strategies, but the other person invests in cash flows or cash capital. And then again, the person who or the entity who contributes in cash bears the financial risks and consequences of the losses, but both share the or the benefits of the investment. One important aspect of environment of Islamic finance is risk sharing. If you go to a bank that utilizes or uses the Islamic finance, they won't tell you that if you invest with us, we will give you 5% profit. They will give you, we guarantee 5% profit because of the history of investment in that area. But then if there is a loss, then the investor or the person who's depositing the money will have also to share the consequences of the loss. Another principle is fair pricing, which encourages the investors when there is an opportunity, an investment, a merchandise being produced and so on, that greed is forbidden. So a proper pricing that guarantees profit for the person or entity investing, but also limits the amount of financial benefits because it has to go back to the community. Another principle is charity, which is zakat or almsgiving. And most of the financial resources, any savings of any Muslim, the 2 billion Muslims, currently the population of Muslims on earth, each one of them is supposed to be giving 2.5% of their financial resources that is stagnant for 1 year, which is a principle that prevents saving for the sake of saving. The Islamic money or resources needs to be revolved all over, so for the benefit of the social cohesion, social development, education, and other areas that are important for the development. I think I have lots and lots to say, but I think I will leave it for the questions to answer more if that is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Iyad. I'll come back to you again with more questions as we go. Now I'm going to come to you, George. With over 80% of the population adhering to faith globally, and leaders having influence, faith leaders having influence in the communities as they act as first responders in most of the cases to these communities. You are working you're working in Kenya actually for a faith-based but non-denominational organization, Eric's Development Partner, and you also sit on the board for Kenya for Resilience, a network where actors also try to contribute to climate-related issues, but also focusing on climate financing as well. With Kenya being one of the countries that has been affected a lot by climate change, with recurring disasters, Kenya for Resilience highly considers the role of faith-based actors in building resilience. So my question to you is, what is your understanding on faith-based actors as leading actors in addressing issues of climate justice, adaptation, and resource mobilization in your context? So where you work, but also with the Kenya for Resilience, which you're part of.
Thank you very much for that very good question. My name is George Chira, as the moderator introduced me. Now, on the question of what my understanding on faith-based actors as, and their role in resource mobilization, I'm going to give examples of what we have had in Kenya for Resilience. And this is really to bring up the grassroots voices and what we've been seeing in our network. And maybe to just give a bit of a context, Kenya for Resilience is a network of civil society actors. We have over 50 local, national, and international NGOs in Kenya. And what Kenya for Resilience does is to facilitate learning around issues of climate change, DRR, but also advocacy in policy. Now, in terms of the membership of this network, we have faith actors because this really works at the grassroots level. So at the very grassroots level, we have communities at the front line who are individual professionals, but also organizations including churches, local churches, who are usually at the forefront when the disaster strikes. Now, coming back to your question, my understanding on the role of faith actors in resource mobilization for climate finance. One, I see that I would like to look at the moral duty of faith actors in resource mobilization. And part of this is that we know that faith leaders and organizations are deeply trusted in communities. And because of this, they engage with people who are usually at the front lines of disasters every time, and usually they are the very first responders. In giving examples like what we have seen in 2024 and even last year, when we had floods in counties like Samburu in Kenya, we saw faith leaders like churches act as the very first responders. They offered their church halls, for instance, to host people who had been displaced. Church compounds were being used as where temporary camps could be set up. We could see faith leaders being at the front line trying to mobilize resources locally. And this was also quite at a national level, at all levels. The grassroots level, at the national level, we saw faith actors come together, mobilize resources, and they were trying to get these resources right from the grassroots level. Now, when through this, we have also seen faith leaders act as hosts for resilience hubs in Kenya for Resilience. And what these resilience hubs do is that they try to facilitate learning at the very grassroots level, where communities can come together, learn with different adaptation mechanisms, maybe come up with community-based disaster risk reduction approaches, and try to implement them at the grassroots level. Now, we've seen these hubs, for instance, come up with resilience strategies, and of course, this is thanks to the trust that community members have for the religious leaders who are in their communities. We also see faith leaders playing a role through the faith-based values in terms of supporting climate justice. And on this, maybe, and it also very much aligns with what the first speaker talked about, is the faith-based values like stewardship for the earth and compassion for the vulnerable, which align very strongly with the climate justice goals. This alignment motivates communities to take active ownership of programs and take initiative to respond to disasters. And just to give our own example, for instance, as ERICS. So ERICS is a Christian-based but non-denominational organization, children's organization, and how we, for instance, mobilize resources for our development work is that we do have campaigns, for instance, every time there is a disaster somewhere. For instance, when Ukraine happened, the disaster in Ukraine, Eric was at the front line trying to appeal to people and come up with new messages of the kind of support that is needed by people. And now, based on the values that our organization, for instance, stands for, which is pretty much what the way maybe LM International also does their work and resource mobilization, people would contribute a lot because of the faith-based values that they have on compassion, justice, and so on. And in Kenya for Resilience, we have also seen leaders forums where faith leaders come up to the front, and they continue to emphasize values of, we want to be at the front. When a disaster happens, we want to be there. We want to give our own resources, even before we go to reach out to, maybe for instance, before for instance, we have managed to mobilize some funds, maybe to respond to a disaster. Local communities are always there trying to do what they can do with the very little that they usually have, and it usually makes a lot of a difference. Now, another role I would like to look at is the flexibility of faith-based funding in disaster response and also in climate change. Faith-based organizations usually manage resources that are more adaptable in terms of, say, when a disaster happens. A local faith actor could be a mosque, it could be a church. When they get to mobilize resources from their own members, then this comes with a lot of flexibility in terms of how shall we design the entire response. And other strategies that we have seen, for instance, with other faith-based actors, including churches, is the formation of faith-based consortia. We have seen, like in Kenya, we have had a consortium that was already formed by Kenya for Resilience, and it included faith-based actors who are working at the very grassroots level. And the kind of responses they were in a position to act on were, responding to floods, the drought, and so on. But the last point I would like to mention really is on the faith networks' capacity to influence policy. With the kind of respect and influence that faith leaders bear in communities, we have a lot of potential to influence policy, and this is for a good cause. And I'm happy to continue discussing this maybe as we proceed. Maybe I could share a bit more examples as we continue. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I would say another big topic when it comes to climate finance is the need to incentivize and innovate these finance models, and that can be accelerated. That can be used to accelerate a green transition and adaptation. So faith-based organizations are exploring several innovative financing mechanisms, such as climate bonds, blended finance, carbon credits, and other ways to mobilize resources for climate resilience. And to navigate this emerging field, and to be a general support for faith actors taking an active role as stewards of creation, WCC has published a range of resources. And by WCC, I mean World Council of Churches, such as, so the resource that they have right now, we have the Climate Responsible Finance, a moral imperative towards children, and many other initiatives and campaigns for learning, but also jointly advocating for the interests of faith and climate. Dr. Ulrich, from your perspective, what do you see in your work when it comes to innovative or alternative faith-based financing mechanisms for climate?
Dear friends, my name is Ulrich Möller. I'm speaking as a commissioner of the World Council of Churches, a newly established Commission for Climate Justice and Sustainable Development. And at the same and the World Council of Churches represents about 580 million Christians worldwide. At the same time, to answer your question, I'm also speaking of a new initiative, the One Climate World, which has been established exactly to innovate the contributions of people of faith and global citizens for financing climate-just investment. Dear friends, we are one world. We share only one world. There is no other one. Global citizens and global faith communities are indispensable actors for financing community-based renewable energy investments in climate justice. And their potential is huge. They need a globally effective instrument enabling people everywhere with a low entry threshold to act together. That's what is a missing link, actually. And that is what One Climate World provides. Climate targets require participation of a global citizens in just transition. And that's why One Climate World is at COP29. We offer a common, effective international structure for global citizens' climate-just investment. The South African Council of Churches has joined One Climate World. Why? The General Secretary says, quote, "One Climate World creates the framework for a global partnership of equals to protect the climate and to achieve justice in which everyone can participate." Quote, end. The All-African Council of Churches, AACC, has formed the Africa Faith Actors Network for Climate Justice. Their goal is to inspire and assist people in Africa to do their part in fighting climate change, or rather climate emergency. The AACC General Secretary, Reverend Dr. Fidon Mombeki, emphasizes, I quote, "But always the question is, how do I do my part? How do I do that?" We see in One Climate World one tangible, practical mechanism people in the churches in the whole world are given to invest in the welfare of the earth. Quote end. A global representative survey in 2024 discovered that 69% of the world's population are prepared to pay 1% of their income for climate protection. At the core of the One Climate World is the 1% principle. Every member contributes 1% of her or his income as a low threshold entrance. Invested in renewable energy projects worldwide, it creates a maximum impact equity through collective action, ensuring that everyone's contribution plays a key role in building sustainable future. Members can expect a return on their investment between 3 and 6%, more in the global south than in the global north because of higher volatility and higher risks and higher interest rates they have to pay also. That's also a part of justice in this global cooperation. Making this initiative economically viable globally and at an individual level. The 1% principle is very simple. For example, Paul from Europe contributes 1% of his yearly income, let's say 400 euro. Elise from Africa also contributes 1% of her annual income, let's say 20 euro. Both contributions are shared equitably in one common fund. That makes possible investments in renewable energy projects in the entire world, in North and South. And also in community projects as a focus. Community-based projects that require renewable energy where there isn't an energy supply. What this enables is environmental and social and economic impacts of a great significance, achieved through solidarity on a global scale, inspired by joy and the possibility of a more just world. In South Africa, the Methodist Church, together with the SACC, champions a solar PV pilot project with the Indoleni School for the Hearing Impaired in the rural KwaZulu-Natal. The wider community also benefits. In Europe, we start with wind and solar PV investments. In Rwanda, the Anglican Church and the Presbyterian Church are partners for pilot investments in rooftop solar water heaters and solar PV irrigation system in rural communities. Further upscaling of One Climate World's outreach will follow in Tanzania, India, Europe and beyond. One Climate World is a perfect empowerment tool for the upcoming global ecumenical decade of climate justice action initiated by the World Council of Churches, which will start September 2025 and will go until 2035. Our call to action at the COP21 is join One Climate World as person, as organization, as company. Support One Climate World upscaling as private or public seed investors. Together, we can make a difference. And for more information, there is a QR code on the business card I will share with you, and you can share it with another. And this QR code leads you on our campaign website, One Climate World, and you find a 5-minute film we produced for COP29 explaining the potential of that and also presentations. I thank you very much. Should I add on the other question now?
Thank you, Dr. Ulrich. To proceed, we are now going to turn our heads towards the global setting for advocacy. Mayrin, you work a lot with advocacy for climate financing, but also for just transition and the improvement of how communities can also be engaged in the whole process. Because one thing that has been continuously coming up is the need for the communities that we're trying to serve to be also part and parcel of the solutions that we are trying to create. So you work with advocacy at policy level, but also at grassroots level. And I would say Green Faith has also been highly vocal in terms of advocacy around divestments, ethical investments, and also other climate justice issues, targeting both faith actors as well as decision makers globally. So my question to you is, can you tell us about advocacy within Green Faith, and what are the main challenges that always come when you're trying to push for divestment within faith institutions, and how have you been overcoming them?
Thank you. Thank you. So, Green Faith, first of all, is a global multi-faith organization that builds grassroots movement and campaigns against the fossil fuel industry while calling for renewable energy initiatives at the grassroots level. So one of our main reasons as to why we concentrate at the grassroots level is because the impacts of climate change happen mostly at the grassroots level. and the grassroots communities have done completely nothing to contribute to it. And so the reason as to why we decide the grassroots voices need to be heard is because they get the impact 100% more than everybody else. And yet their opinions, their voices are never heard. And so the advocacy part of it has been that we mobilize and we train people at the grassroots level so that they can understand the impacts of climate change on their economics, on their social life, on their cultures, and of course on the environment. And so the advocacy part of it has been, to be honest, very difficult because we campaign against the big giants who have enormous financial muscle, and these are the fossil fuel industries. We also campaign and call out the financial institutions that tend to finance these fossil fuel projects, which again have more resources than the community themselves. They have sophisticated and enormous technological know-how more than the community themselves. In most cases, these projects are in communities where people are less educated. People do not understand what is going on out there, let alone knowing what climate impacts look like. And so at Green Faith, we make sure that the language is simple enough, that is relatable to the community so that the community can understand. We make sure that the language leans towards the different faith institutions or faith cultures that the communities practice. Because when communities see that what is happening to them and the solutions are anchored in their Bibles, in their Qurans, in their Jitas, or in their traditional knowledge, then they tend to take it up because they feel like it is relevant to them. The challenge has been that the financial conversation is too technical, such that the community members do not understand. The challenge again has been that the financial conversations, in some instances, faith leaders feel like that is not their mandate. They shouldn't get involved in those conversations because they leave it to the government to take care of those conversations. But when we look at the faith community as a whole, the faith community is a very rich community. Faith communities have schools, they have hospitals, they have, hotels, and they make a lot of money. If we do not target the faith community so that they can get angered enough to start demanding that financial flows go to renewable energy and regenerative projects in the community, then nobody will do it. Somebody talked about the ethical value of the conversations. The fossil fuel industry brings around about corruption. It promotes corruption in different sources, whether we like it or not, because governments cut deals. Politicians cut deals in the event that the fossil fuel industries are coming to their countries. There are a lot of kickbacks. But faith leaders have a moral obligation to call out corruption in its state. So if we have faith leaders leading and educated and leading from a point of our businesses will run in a clean financial system as the one that was being discussed by Dr. Ed, then we shape the conversation and we shape the narrative in terms of climate finance. And another part is that when we talk about the illicit financial flows that come to the communities, I call them illicit financial flows because they finance greed. They finance greed over, economic development. And they leave the communities in worse states than they were before. And so equipping faith leaders with information and the right education that can allow them to have these constructive conversations in places like COP then pushes the pin to the point where communities are not exploited, but communities grow together. So at Green Faith, what we encourage is that we encourage the messaging of it is important for us to start thinking about financing locally led, affordable, accessible, renewable energy initiatives. When you look at the structure of the climate finance in itself, the structure is very complicated. It is too sophisticated that even if we had community members trying to access money for adaptation, they cannot, because the structure has been designed in a way that leaves the community out. And so our advocacy strategy has been to call for lean and easy financial structure that can go down to the grassroots level. Because if you ask a person who's been a farmer for the rest of his life to sit and apply for a GC, a Green Climate Fund or an adaptation fund, they would not know how to start going about it because the paperwork is too much. the language is sophisticated, the kind of partnerships that you're required to have within the financial system to even access the adaptation fund is one that the community does not have. So at Green Faith, the question is then, how do we use our places of worship, which are ripe for message dissemination, to try and shift that conversation? And it is in terms of all of us who are Christians and Muslims and Hindus and whichever traditional way, you give tithe in church. And the question is, have we ever thought about asking where our church development fund is being invested, for instance? If we don't ask those questions, then we will be those people who are financing our own climate chaos. Because you pay tithe, you pay, offering in church, but you know your church or your mosque has a development fund. But you don't ask where this development fund is being, invested. You could be financing your own climate chaos. So our question is, because we faith leaders reach enormous number of people in one setting, be it in a mosque during madrasa or be it in a church during a sermon, we are asking that faith leaders can have these messages in their sermon so that they can be in a position to enlighten and educate their congregations to ask such tough questions. And also the congregations to be in a position to ask their churches where they invest their money. Another part is that if the church decided to look at the profits they make from the different institutions that they have, the schools, the health centers, the businesses, they can also create a fund that goes towards curbing the impacts of climate change, because we do not do that. And so it would be important for faith leaders and faith institutions to lead by example when it comes to climate finance, because I do not believe that there's any funder. I've never seen any funder who gives you money and they don't say, can we see your own personal contribution? We can start having the same conversation as faith leaders and also ask faith leaders to have the same conversation. The discussion becomes very difficult when we are robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're preaching water, but you're taking wine, so to speak. You cannot invest in a fossil fuel industry, but ask the financial institutions to invest in renewable energy. And so the advocacy has become difficult because most of the time I get challenges because people say, oh, you work for faith institutions, which means you have a lot of money. That is the assumption. It could be true or it could not be true. But the question is, how do we coin our conversations to say that as a faith institution, we are leading with our best foot forward? So the advocacy has been to hold each other accountable also as faith institutions, that we should first of all see how much we are putting into the fight against climate change before we ask other financial institutions to do the same. But most importantly, for faith leaders to be brave enough to do the right thing. Brave enough to do the right thing in terms of challenge our own leaders when we see our own leaders financing the destruction of our cultures, the destructions of our community, and making it impossible for our communities to rise for, development and to live their lives better. And the last part in that part is that we also need to be in a position to start thinking around, do we need the money that comes to us? It is very difficult to say no to money. But the moral calling of a faith leader is to be able to have those hard conversations. When the money is coming, we do not know the source of the money. Faith leaders should be in a position to ask where this money came from so that they do not also consume blood money. The discussion around sanctity of life and dignity of life, because some of these illicit financial flows rip our communities of their dignity. When people are displaced, for you to build back, it takes a long time that puts the community in a circle of poverty. And so faith leaders' conversation should be around helping the community to maintain their dignity or to get back their dignity, and also to maintain sanctity of life, because illicit financial flows cause death. Thank you very much.
That was very powerful, Marian. Thank you so much. And it's also important that as we have these conversations, we also still bring in the whole idea of bridging between the gap that is between policy and practice. So we have so many good policies that actually speaks a lot, but now when it comes to the actual practice, we have zero practice. So it's really good that we actually have other faith actors who are already pushing to ensure that we promote accountability, we push the communities to actually demand what is rightfully theirs. I would say, before we get into the questions from the floor, I would want to ask you, Dr. Iyad, how do you see faith institutions educating themselves in this regard? We have heard from Marian that they need to also push and be able to push the communities themselves, but also to start demanding accountability and also to start demanding the need for what is rightfully theirs and try to clean the money, try to make sure that we also pushing for the same agenda. So how do you see faith institutions and faith actors actually getting there where they actually demand that?
This is a challenging question. But I would say we need to start by understanding our own power of mobilizing resources for the sake of humanity, climate change, and the communities. I'll tell you a story. I'll not mention the organization or the name of the person. But it is an organization that oversees hundreds of millions of Christians that I was talking to him. And he said that once he went to a country and asked how much does our church, our whatever organization own in that country. And he was surprised to know that they owned $2 billion of assets in that country, and he didn't believe it. So one important area that we need to work on, which is doing an audit of our resources, assets, financial investments, and so on. The second thing that we need to understand and learn about is how our religions consider permissible financing and investment. What is permissible per that religion? And I am sure most of us, we don't know that, for example, Christianity forbids investment in alcohol, pornography, child abuse, abuse of nature, and so on. Likewise, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus. So we need to come up with, which is being done, I believe, by my friends and colleagues at Faith Invest. They have captured some of that knowledge in their publications. But it should not stop there. And it should go to my third point, which is understanding how those religious principles work for climate finance. For example, zakat in Islam, as I mentioned, you have to pay 2% of your assets that have been stagnant for 1 year. Now, the basic principle is that this money should go to serve the community, right? And serving the community for an ordinary Muslim is giving cash to those who are in need. But it does not stop there. Serving the community is to prevent harm as well, is to invest in communal services that, third is to prevent risk and disasters. So all of those are not understood by the ordinary and even the leaders of those religions. So I think these three basic principles that we need to understand to be able to mobilize, as Maren mentioned, to mobilize the global community, the religious community, to support, the religious contribution to climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I open the floor for questions, contributions, remarks, additions, examples from different communities. They are also welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the passionate and then experienced sharing of your heart and also pouring out your heart. Being a faith-based worker, I believe, and I strongly believe and I have seen, there is a lot that faith-based group have been contributed to the communities that are affected by the negative impacts of the climate change, be it a church or mosque or whatever. So I'm speaking as an evangelical person where we give 10% tithe. It's a quote to quote. People give more than that. But it won't just stop tithe. So there is a faith, full services are being given to the communities that are affected by disasters. And the whole question is in this COP, which is supposed to be, climate finance COP. And the discussion is going on the other side of the room where it talks about the new, quantified goal, the new quantified goal on the finance. Now, how much it will go to the faith-based groups? Faith-based organization being a forefront in the communities that are affected by the disasters, and they take extra mile to go there and serve the communities. Or the allocations are being considered to be able to bring in faith-based groups into the allocations. The government, the other side, is talking about what are the sources. Yesterday they were saying that, it's not 1 billion, which is 100 billion, which were discussed in 2010, but it's all about 1 trillion they required by 2030. Where do you get this 1 trillion and how much the faith-based groups can able to access this 1 trillion, which will, immediately and faithfully can go to the ground zero where faith-based groups are working so faithfully. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, all presenters. My name is Dr. Tinashe Gumbo from the All Africa Conference of Churches. Thank you, Doc, for acknowledging the work that the faith actors are doing, and all the presenters. I really enjoyed your presentations. Just to my sister Marine, yeah, I could see the passion that you have in trying to inculcate the activism in our communities. I just wanted to know, to what extent are you facing any backlash from the governments, and how do you deal with that? To what extent do you build the capacity of our individual faith leaders who may be interested in partaking this particular task?
So we take one more. Thank you very much to all the panelists. My name is Christian Knoll, and I'm based at the London School of Economics Faith Center, where we look at the intersections between faith and climate. And one of the things that we found in our research is precisely what you're speaking to, is that there is tremendous amount of potential within faith communities around the world in facilitating this sustainable development. And I think everybody in this room appreciates that. But my question is, how can I, as a person based in the UK, bring this message back to policymakers in my country, where I live and where I'm from, originally the United States, and tell them about the spectacular potential that there is in engaging with faith actors when conducting development work or other forms of political engagement in this space. Thank you very much to all of you.
Okay, thank you. Marion?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Tinashe. We have experienced enormous backlash from the governments in the work that we've been trying to do. Because, allow me to use a Bible phrase, that the Bible says that my people perish for lack of information. Now, when we look at the power dynamics of development, in most cases, corrupt government officials and even the financial institutions become comfortable when the community does not have information. And so in us trying to give the community information that can allow them to fight back or ask the right questions, we get a lot of backlash. We get our activists get arrested, some get intimidated, some get threatened by death. And even us as an organization, we get accused of so many things because we're trying to work. How do we deal with it? There's no like single answer on how we deal with it, but my form of answer of how we deal with it is we suck it up and we continue, because there's no giving up. The most important thing is that we always try as much as possible to have accurate information, because when we do not have accurate information that we can give to the community, then we will be dead in the water. How we deal with it is that we look at it head on, and we always ask for information, for roundtables with the same government officials, so that the community members and our faith leaders can look them in the eye and ask those questions. That way, we soften the blow a little bit. A different part of that answer is that at the African level, or even globally, it is not easy to find governments that point guns at faith leaders. They will not come and point guns at faith leaders, especially if you're dressed in your, faith attire. If it is a reverend in a collar, they will not come and manhandle you or trying to throw you in prison. It only happens if people are dressed in a civil way, like you're civilians. So another way that happens, how we get backlash, is that the truth which people don't like talking about, but I like talking about, is that we also have terribly, horribly corrupt faith leaders who will be bought by the politicians. They will come to the community meetings in the morning, but at night they will be the politicians taking brown envelopes that have money, or they will be taking Land Cruisers, and then they will not talk on behalf of the community. That also happens. That also is a way that we get backlash. But the good news is we have formidable, brave, loyal faith leaders who also stick it out and speak truth to power. So what we do is that we carefully identify those faith leaders who are brave enough to say the right thing, who are brave enough to challenge the powers, and who are brave enough to call out financial institutions on the kind of damages they are doing in the community. And those are the faith leaders that we support. We make sure that they get education. We make sure that we ask them to come to these conversations when we need to have them on behalf of the community. The backlash continues to happen, but we also continue to soldier on, because there's no sleeping. We'll only sleep when justice has been realized in the community. And to my brother over there, my answer to that, and probably some of the panelists will also answer, is that you need to mobilize as many like-minded people as possible so that you start the conversation. Because if you do not have like-minded people, then you will never succeed. We've got countries that do not feel like talking about phasing out fossil fuel is important, because their development, or the backbone of their development, is based on it. But they don't see the disruption because it doesn't happen to them. But the most big part of it is that profit is a monster. When governments see that it is a profit, they do not want to let it go. So the question that I always say, or what we always say at Green Faith, is we need to build the alternative narrative that has matching numbers. If we look at the alternative narrative and we say renewable energy, for example, will give you the same profit margin as fossil fuel, then we might tip the pin in that conversation a little bit. But build a movement, and a movement does not have to have 1,000 people. A movement has to have 4 committed, like-minded people, and the conversation kicks from there. Thank you very much.
Are there any other panelists who also want to respond to that?
Well, I could just emphasize on the second question in terms of how do we pass this message back to the government. Now, as we can hear from all the panelists here and the experiences that we are all sharing, faith leaders have and faith actors have a very big role in communities. And I think it's really up to us, one, as individuals in our individual capacities and in our organizations, to continue doing movement building that Marilyn already talked about. Because the more we continue to identify as faith actors and continue to make sure that we are being involved in policy dialogue spaces, then the more the relevance we gain. And therefore, when it comes to the policy making, the question of where are the faith actors in this? Where is their voice? Then I think we're going to get the influence that we need to do. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I only can say all the levels are equally important. You need to do it from the grassroots on. And then you have also to have the networks to be part and influential at the more complex and complicated levels of engagement. And that is why the World Council of Churches has developed an own school for economic justice and ecological justice literacy, where church leaders of the churches globally each year can come, and youth upcoming leaders, and they can be educated to be able to respond on that complex levels also to the challenges which are there. And therefore also the campaigning of the churches together must be strong on these issues, like for example tax justice, debt cancellation. That is nothing which you can do only locally, but you have to address the powers to be internationally on that. And that is what the World Council of Churches together with its partners is doing, to fix inequality of climate change with the power of the 600 million people behind these networks. Then the authorities also know it's not a quantité négligeable. They have to deal with these matters. And one important issue, for example, the last G20 meeting in New Delhi, I think it was. That was the first time that the presidency of it proposed a wealth tax on billionaires, and to start with taxing the super rich people in order to finance climate justice development and to get people out of debt tracks and so on. And that is what the WCC has been proposing and developing with their so-called Sakeos tax already for decades. And it is very important to get people together globally for a campaign for progressive wealth taxes, because up to 5% wealth tax globally already raises annually 2 trillion euros of dollars to lift up 2.3 billion people out of poverty, for example, and to deliver healthcare and social protection for 3.6 billion people. So both has to come together. The work at the grassroots with the communities, looking where the real demands are. I couldn't agree more with what you said. And at the same time, linking it all through up to the levels where the global decisions are being made, and to be prophetic advocates, but also experts on these levels as well. Thank you.
Actually, I have a follow-up question for you, Ulrich. So you've just mentioned about this school, and also in this discussion, we are also focusing a little bit more on accessibility to the people on the grassroots level, but also at all levels. So how accessible is this school that you spoke about, and who can be part of it, and why?
Now, it has to be people who are really committed to go not just for one seminary or so, because things are more complex than that, but to apply for a several weeks school, like a semester or something like that. And at this, experts on the different fields of the question of a new financial architecture, taking care of the question of justice, taking care of the question of how environmental aspects have to be taken as part of investments, as part of dealing with money, that these experts educate church leaders and future church leaders for that. And they don't have to pay for that. There are funds to make that possible, but they have to have the accreditation through their churches, so that the churches in their ownership also know it's not just a little expert popping up and then he goes away, but he is ready to serve the community, the faith community, also with his knowledge. And if you on the website of the GEM School of WCC, you can find the application requirements.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sure, this is interesting. Mick, I think he was.
From the Country Program Advisory Team for IFAD projects in Nigeria. Marianne, when I saw the name of your program, I started to wonder whether it's a coincidence that you are wearing a green blouse. Seriously, for all of negative reactions from people when we all believe that faith-based organizations are just out for charity and to support the poor and the needy, and then you are now entering climate finance. Have you had any negative reactions? And if so, what did you do or what are you doing about those reactions? Thank you very much.
Before you respond, Marin, maybe we can have one more question. Ladies, where are you? I'm a one hell of a gender activist. Women, are you with us? Anyway, it's okay.
Thank you. Am I audible? I'm from Southern Hemisphere. Eswatini is one of the things. Am I audible now? All right, thank you. I'm saying I'm from Eswatini, country in the Southern Hemisphere. We are a absolute monarchy. And what I've noticed is that the church has been captured by the state. The theology, there was one speaker, I think yesterday in one of the sessions here, who was asking who is funding pastors to get proper theology. And we are dominated by the Christian faith. Again, within the Christian, we've got three school of thoughts. Recently I was launching Climate Years in Eswatini. If you go to those who affiliate to World Council of Churches, they are ready to listen climate issues. But if you go to those who are in the League of African Churches, they will listen, what are you saying about the king in whatever you are saying? And they will give you the theology. It is God who puts the king. You need to pray for the king this, the king that. Then we have the charismatics, I will say, the Pentecostals, we normally call they affiliate to Conference of Churches. Those ones, they will tell you, our duty is to pray as clergy. We just need to pray. And if again you go to those Council of Churches, like I was saying, they will ask you one question. Masugu, are you ready for what we are about to start? Masugu is my name. Are you ready to challenge the king? Are you ready to when you try to go to the policy aspect, Eswatini Environment Authorities, the party people, they will listen, and they will just tell you, listen here, we are doing this just for the paper. Otherwise, the king has said that project must be there. Like it or not, that project must be there. Then the question is, what do you do? And lastly, as I was talking about the theology, we still have the denominational theology. Some churches, they will tell you that you cannot be ordained in the Anglican Church, taking for instance, I'm an Anglican, unless you went to the College of Transfiguration. Well, what if the College of Transfiguration has the wrong theology? Then maybe, I'm not sure if I'm directing to you, Green Faith and World Council, who is controlling the curriculum? Because honestly, in my case, it's not clear really what is the theology, what is it that we believe in. And the last thing most people do, they decided to ignore, because the system is able to say, you want to plant a church, they listen what you are preaching, or you are preaching something against the church, you are not going to get land to plant the church. There is one way or the other to capture the church. Who's speaking for the church, which is already captured? In the case of Eswatini, I'm making an example. Thank you.
That's amazing. Who wants to take that up? So I'll give it to you, Dr. Ulrich, and then also Dr. Iyad. You.
Thank you. Yeah, that question is a challenging one, because the diversity of our world is also the diversity in our churches. And that fact has to be acknowledged, and we have to start from there by listening to one another, listening to the gospel we have, also disputing where we think that the interpretation is not correct, but looking what do we have in common in our task, in our calling. And I wouldn't see any strong representatives of churches anymore who would deny that climate change and injustice is a challenge faith have to address. There are people who do that, also clergies who do that. But don't be hampered by them, just go your way. Because in the mainstream, the churches know that their calling is not to miss another opportunity to confess our faith in the challenges we are facing now. And that is climate justice at the top, including the very other aspects which have been mentioned here. And so if you are caught in a church which is not ready to listen, you are not forced to stay in that church. Look where you find a communion which is listening, which is truthful to the faith and to the calling of faith communities, and you will find companionship and you can go into struggles which are necessary. The World Council of Churches is a communion of a huge diversity, but what unites it is that the common task to confess Christ today, to confess the faith today, is not possible without engaging in the challenges of today, and therefore don't be afraid to go into disputes and into struggles. Jesus was also not afraid to struggle with the powers to be, and that is what is also asked from us today if necessary. But in many fields and in many church movements, there is an openness, and you will find people you can address as allies. Thank you.
You can pass it to Dr. Iyad. Who controls the theology, Dr. Iyad?
Well, of course, I will not speak from a Christian perspective. I don't dare to do so. But I believe your question relates to all religions on earth. There are so many sects of each of the religions. But it requires a visionary institution or person to bring all these different sectors or sects together. And I would like to mention Pope Francis. Pope Francis, because the theology on eco-theology or on environment has diverse understanding by the different denominations, he was a visionary person and he put Laudato Si. Laudato Si is an extraction of the understanding of our relationship from the Bible and practices of Christians. And I believe, as far as I know, it has been approved by the World Council of Churches, by the World Evangelical Alliance, by the World Lutheran Federation, by all other Christian denominations. So it became a unifying theology about, ecology and our relationship. Similarly, in Islam, UNEP has been able to facilitate the bringing of different Muslim sects, and there are copies of Al-Mizan over there, and according to the Vatican, Al-Mizan is the sibling of Laudato Si. It is an interpretation of the relationship of humans with their environment from a Quranic and prophetical Prophet Muhammad's perspectives and practices. So this is what I'm saying. We do need do see that there is a challenge in what you're saying. It's absolutely there, but this is, again, it requires a visionary people, and I hope to be able to work with Hindus and Buddhists and other religions to bring that common unifying perspective into the practice and the knowledge of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. We are running out of time. And as we round up, I would say the main key messages from these discussions have been, one, accountability. How do we hold our governments, our faith leaders, our communities, and even ourselves accountable for the things that we do, for the decisions that we make? How do we hold accountable our governments for the investments that they make, and also our churches and our religious sectors? How do we hold them accountable? So accountability. Then number two, how do we also make sure that our communities that we seek to serve as organizations, as governments, as different people, how do we make sure that those communities actually benefit from these efforts that we're trying to put in? And then number three is that the link between faith actors and their actual role on the ground. How do we demand accountability? So accountability continues to be the main theme, but also linking between policy and practice in ensuring that faith leaders or faith actors become leading actors in ensuring that we have just transition, and we also push for what we are pushing here today, just climate finance, where we ensure that we also receive what we're supposed to receive as faith-based actors, but also pushing from our own side using our own resources. And to conclude this, I would say climate-induced disasters knows no borders. Global South, Global North, you'd call it what you want to call it, but it knows no borders. When it comes for all of us, Muslim, Christians, Buddhists, and whatever it is, all these religions. So it knows no religion, it knows no geography. It's coming for all of you, so do your part. Thank you. You use this one.
Thank you for engagement also in this session. In 5 minutes we will have a next session, so you are welcome to participate in that. I think we give this panel another round of applause because they helped us thinking. Thank you so much. I just stay for a group photo before.